2220. Lakes River Chapter 2. The cool breeze from the air conditioning brushed the back of Kamilla Roswell's neck as she stood in front of the steamed-up bathroom mirror. Her fingers slid mechanically through her short, ash-blonde hair. The muted hum of the starport's life support systems provided a constant background tone to her morning routine. The dull metal walls of the quarters reflected the artificial morning light that squeezed through the narrow windows. Outside, the endless blackness of space stretched out, broken by the faint lights of distant stars. The sight had long since lost its awe. After 5 years on the station, it had become as commonplace as brushing her teeth. The shrill beeping of her communicator broke the morning silence. Kamilla hastily rinsed out her mouth as Lieutenant Chan's harsh voice echoed through the room. "Commander Roswell, your presence is immediately required in the control room." Kamilla wiped her face. "Understood. Give me 3 minutes." She slipped on the grey uniform, its fabric cool against her skin. The imperial insignia on her chest gleamed dully in the artificial light. Her boots echoed metallically on the floor as she hurried through the narrow corridors of the station. And the control room greeted them with the characteristic flickering of dozens of holo displays. Blue and red lights danced across the technicians' faces as they stared transfixed at their consoles. The air was heavy with the smell of recycled oxygen and cold sweat. "What do we have?" Kamilla asked as she strode to the central command post. The 3-dimensional projection of the Wayaliti system floated in the air before her, crisscrossed with pulsing lines that marked the hyperlane connections. Lieutenant Chan pointed to a blinking red dot between the system's 3 stars. "The scout probe transmitted these images 20 minutes ago." He activated a magnification. The characteristic crystalline design of Almoran architecture became visible, angular and menacing, as if growing out of the rock. "An outpost," Kamilla murmured. Her fingers drummed a nervous rhythm on the metal console. The stone constructions of the Almorans seemed to swallow up light of the 3 stars. "Have they detected our probe?" "Negative, Commander. It's still operating in cloaking mode." Kamilla studied the tactical overview. The Almoran outpost was between the hyperlane crossings to Kurturn, Masinisa's demise, and the Warute system. It is a perfect starting point for further expansion or an attack. The metallic taste of blood spread through her mouth. She could feel the tense atmosphere in the room, the nervous whispering of the technicians, the scrape of boots on the metal floor. "Show me the energy signatures," she ordered. The holograms changed, revealing pulsating energy patterns that ran through the stone structure like glowing veins. A complex web of energy signatures pulsed before Kamilla's eyes. Most of the Almoran outpost systems were running on minimum power, typical of a new installation that had not yet reached full functionality. The crystalline structures cast ghostly shadows in the light of the Wayaliti system's 3 stars. "Energy levels are low," Lieutenant Chan murmured, swiping through several layers of data on the hologram. "No signs of weapon systems or heavy defenses. The hull is mostly freshly cut mineral rock." Kamilla nodded slowly. Her fingers slid over the smooth surface of the command console as she studied the tactical overlays. The outpost was strategically placed, close enough to the hyperlane crossings to monitor traffic, but far enough away not to attract immediate attention. "How long?" she asked, without seeing the displays. "The material analysis indicates construction within the last 3 weeks, Chan replied. His voice sounded pressed. "The mineral structures show hardly any signs of aging from radiation exposure." Besides the low hum of life support systems mingled with the muffled click of keyboards and the nervous rustle of uniforms. The air in the control room seemed to thicken with every breath. Kamilla activated the encrypted communication terminal. The holographic keyboard materialized before her hands. The Imperial seal appeared on the main screen. She felt the crew's stares at her back. Priority message to Fleet Command, she dictated. Her voice sounded firm and professional. Almoran outpost detected in the Wayaliti system. Construction was completed approximately 3 weeks ago. Minimal defense systems. Locan. 30 degrees ecliptic latitude, 72 degrees ecliptic longitude relative to Wayaliti, requesting further instructions. The seal pulsed briefly as the encrypted message was sent into hyperspace. Kamilla leaned back, her gaze wandering back to the three-dimensional representation of the outpost. The angular structures reminded her of the mountain formations on Almoran. A silent demonstration of Almoran power and territoriality. Activate the scout probe's backup systems, she ordered. If there's so much as a rock moving, I want to know about it. Understood, Commander, Chan confirmed. His fingers flew over the controls as more data layers overlaid the hologram. Almoran outpost's energy signatures continued to pulse in a steady rhythm, like the heartbeat of a sleeping predator. The massive bronze doors of the Senate chamber swung open with a creak. Cold drafts blew through the circular room, making the heavy velvet curtains flutter at the high-arched windows. Outside, the rising sun colored the sky over Xanadu a gloomy red. Admiral Paulina Romero stood at the lectern, her uniform immaculately pressed, her grey hair military short. Her knuckles stood out white as she clung to the podium. In front of her, the rising rows of benches in the Senate were only slowly filling up. A shame to summon us here at this ungodly hour. Senator Marcus Volt's massive figure squeezed between the rows. Sweat glistened on his forehead. Some of us have other commitments too. The Senate is not a sideline, Senator. The mayor's voice cut through the room like a knife. The security of the Empire will brook no delay. The holographic projection of the Wayaliti system hovered over the Senate chamber. 3 suns danced in a complex orbital, surrounded by their planetary families. A red dot pulsed on the outer system boundary, the Almoran outpost. The Almorans have established a military outpost in the Wayaliti system in the last 48 hours. Romero activated a magnification of the scout. Kamilla Roswell registered the first signs of construction yesterday at 2100. Wayaliti is in the neutral zone. Senator Elena Petrov jumped up from her seat. Her jeweled rings sparkled in the light of the holograms. The Almorans have every right. The neutral zone ends 3 light years from Wayaliti. Romero projected a boundary map across the system. Red and blue lines marked the agreed territories. This outpost is a clear provocation. Unease spread through the room. Senator Vogt wiped his forehead with a silk scarf. Perhaps a surveying error. The borders are complex. Our data is clear. Romero's fingers tapped a precise sequence into the console. The holographic projection flickered as new images appeared, pulsing energy signatures and shades of red, detailed material scans of the Almoran construction. The typical construction of their stone masonry culture. The Almorans know exactly what they're doing. This outpost is just the beginning of their territorial expansion. What do you propose, Ed? Senate President Ava Chen leaned forward in her raised seat, the golden chain of office jingling softly. The bluish light from the holograms made her sharp features appear even more striking. We have to show strength before they consider other systems. Romero straightened her shoulders, her uniform rustling. I'm requesting authorization to upgrade the starbase in the Kuoturn system to a star keep. With a fully armed keep, we can control the hyperlane to Wayaliti and the cost. Senator Pitt rose. Rings flashed as she pounded her fist on her console. The holograms flickered. Do you have any idea what it takes to build a keep? The resources for the weapons systems alone. The trade guild will never. The price of security is high. And Romero's voice turned icy, cutting through the tumult like a blade. But the price of hesitation could be even higher. The Almorans only respect military strength. The subdued light of the setting sun fell through the high windows of the Senate Hall, casting long shadows on the polished marble floor and bathing the enormous columns in a copper-colored twilight. The circular hall, lined with curved tiers of dark wood, literally vibrated with the tense atmosphere. Paulina Romero stood at the lectern, her uniform immaculate and her grey hair military short. Her knuckles stood out white as she clung to the edge of the lectern. Holographic displays flickered above her, showing detailed maps of the Coturn system and the location of the Almoran outpost. 7 corvettes for an entire border area. Her voice echoed through the hall, bouncing off the marble walls. The Pegasus flotilla can't possibly conduct effective patrols. The asteroid belt between Coturn E and I offers too many hiding places. We need at least 5 more ships to secure the entrances to the hyperlanes. Elena Petrov leaned back in her chair, her silk suit shimmering like liquid silver in the twilight. Her rings flashed as she made a dismissive hand gesture. Admiral Romero is exaggerating wildly. The cost of 5 new corvettes would blow our defense budget. I'm not even talking about the maintenance costs and the training of new crews. The senator's murmur swelled, mingling with the low hum of the air conditioning. Excited whispers filled the ranks. The smell of expensive perfume and old wood hung in the air, mingling with the tense atmosphere to create an almost tangible fog. Sevia Heimber rose from her elevated throne, the golden inlays of her chain of office gleaming in the last of the sunlight. Her black cloak rustled like raven wings as she descended the steps. The murmuring stopped instantly as if someone had flipped a switch. Her boots clacked on the marble, her footsteps echoing through the sudden, expectant silence. I've studied the reports. Her voice was quiet, but penetrated every corner of the hall. Commander Roswell's analysis is clear. The Almorans are systematically expanding their presence. She stepped up to the lectern, briefly touching Romero's shoulder. The Admiral took a step back, her face masking military discipline. The Senate will now vote. Sevia activated the voting system with a wave of her hand. Blue lights flickered in front of every seat. As Impreatrix, I call upon you. Think of the safety of our empire, of our citizens in the border colonies. The lights began to pulsate, waiting for input. The senators moved restlessly in the ranks, clothes rustled, and data pads were consulted. The aging wood of the benches groaned under the weight of the decision. Elena Petrov pressed her lips together, her finger hovering over the voting field. Marcus Vogt wiped the sweat from his forehead. His signet rings glistened in the last sunlight. Paulina Romero stood motionless next to the desk, her posture tense as the first votes came in. The numbers began to rise on the large display above her. The projection above the lectern flickered as more voices came in. Green lights lit up after the other. Nadine Heimber rose from her seat in the front row, her simple robes contrasting with the pageantry of the other senators. Tethelic stands behind this motion. Her voice rang clear and firm through the chamber. Our sacred duty is to protect the Empire and its citizens. The Almorans are a threat to our way of life, to our genetic purity. The nun stroked the helix symbol on her chest. Around her, the other church representatives nodded in agreement, their voting fields turning green. Elena Petrov rolled her eyes, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the edge of her desk. The helix is meddling in military affairs again. 60% in favor. The system announced. The numbers on the display continued to scroll upwards. Sevia Heimber stood motionless next to the desk, watching the incoming votes. The light from the setting sun illuminated her chain of office, casting dancing reflections on the walls. 70%. The mechanical voice echoed through the hall, bouncing off the marble walls. Paulina Romero tightened, a barely noticeable smile playing around the corners of her mouth. The tension in her shoulders eased, her hands clasped behind her back in her usual military pose. 75%. The numbers on the holoprojection continued to rotate upwards, casting bluish shadows on the tense faces of the senators. Marcus Vought sighed heavily and pressed his voting pad. His hand trembled slightly as he confirmed the decision. Another green light appeared on the projection, pulsating with the others. 80% approval. Vote closed. Then the words echoed through the hall like a verdict. The hall breathed a sigh of relief, the tension of the last few minutes dissolving into a relieved murmur. Murmurs swelled as the senators turned to their neighbors and discussed the results. Datapads were put away. Robes were adjusted. Nadine Heimber tilted slightly in Paulina's direction, her ascetic figure looking even more gaunt in the twilight. The Helix will bless the new ships as soon as they are put into service. Our prayers will accompany them on their patrol. The senator has spoken. Sevia's voice drowned out the murmur effortlessly, her words cutting through the room like a blade. Admiral Romero, you have authorization for 5 new corvettes. Use the resources wisely. Eleanor Petrov gathered her papers together, her movements sharp and choppy. Her gray streak fell across her face as she stood up. This will cost us dearly. The private conference room in the west wing of the Senate building offered a breathtaking view of the Xanadu skyline at night. Sevia Heimber stood at the head of the oval table, her silhouette silhouetted against the glittering lights of the city. A bluish, flickering hollow projection of Rita Griffin hovered above the polished tabletop. The scientist looked exhausted, dark circles appearing under her eyes. Her bushy red hair was standing on end in all directions. The Almorans don't just set up an outpost. Rita rubbed her eyes under horn-rimmed glasses. Our sensors show massive mining activity in the asteroid belt of the Wayaliti system. They're systematically plundering the resources. Myra Gupta leaned forward, her colorful bracelets clinking softly. The colonies in the border sector are increasingly reporting sightings of Almoran patrol ships. The people there live in constant fear. These stone creatures don't respect borders. Paulina Romero's voice cut through the room. They see our diplomatic efforts as weakness. Nadine Heimber folded her hands in front of her on the table, her simple robes in stark contrast to Sevia's ostentatious garb. The Helix see the Almorans as a serious threat to the genetic purity of our people. Their presence so close to our borders is unacceptable. My analysis of the probe data reveals something disturbing. Rita's hologram flickered as she stepped closer to the camera. There are remnants of a massive mining operation in the outer reaches of the Wayaliti system. The Almorans have hollowed out an entire moon down to the basic structure, a typical pattern of behavior. Sevia approached the holoprojection. They consume a system's resources and move on like a swarm of locusts. The new corvettes will take at least 6 months to be operational. Paulina activated a tactical map of the border area. Red markings showed the known Almoran activities. In the meantime, were vulnerable. Myra Gupta pulled a datapad from her colorful robe, her fingers flitting across the display. Thus, as the records from first contact are confusing, the Almorans don't seem to have a biological sex. They reproduce by splitting off fragments of rock. Rita projected a series of diagrams into the air. The new individuals remain immobile for the first 50 years while their crystalline structure develops. Nadine Heimber frowned, her ascetic features hardening. They only choose their pronoun after this phase of immobility, after about 3.5 orbits of their home planet Orsor, an alien species. Sevia studied the projected data.
Yeah.
Their concepts of identity are fundamentally different from ours. Paulina tapped one of the red dots on the tactical map. Their physiology makes them perfect space colonists. They need no atmosphere, no food in the conventional sense. They absorb minerals directly from the rock. The few successful attempts at communication were. Rita adjusted glasses. They speak of themselves in abstract terms, referring to themselves as the rocks or the formation until they choose their pronoun. The helix has difficulty categorizing this life form. Nadine stroked the symbol on her chest. The genetic structure, if you can even call it that, doesn't follow any known patterns. Wild stories are circulating in the border colonies. Myra scrolled through more. The settlers claim that the Almorans can communicate with the rock, shape it to their will. Unconfirmed rumors. Paulina's voice sounded sharp. We know they're expanding aggressively, consuming resources, and not respecting territorial boundaries. The silvery light of Odin flooded through the panoramic windows of the Senate building, while its two smaller moons, Hugin and Munin, stood like watchful eyes in the night sky. The triple brightness cast interlocking shadows through the circular meeting room, moving across the marble walls like an intricate shadow play. The reflections on the polished surfaces made the room look like an underground grotto. A massive conference table of earth and wood shimmered like dark water under the otherworldly light. The holographic displays cast a bluish glow into the air, blending with the silvery moonlight to create an unreal atmosphere. The soft whirring of the air conditioning sounded like the distant whisper of hidden machinery. Sevia watched the moon's shadows move across Rita Griffin's scarred face. The triple light made the old injury stand out even more clearly. So, corporations will take advantage of any mistake, Rita said, her fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on the tabletop. They're just waiting for us to stumble. Myra Gupta stood at the window, her silhouette framed by Odin's light. I have reports of new developments at Quantum Dynamics. They're working on technologies that could make our encryption systems obsolete. Paulina Romero leaned against one of the marbled pillars, the moonlight making her silver-gray hair look like polished metal. We can't stand on the sidelines forever and watch them grow more powerful. Every day without access to their resources makes us weaker. The hologram in the center of the room showed a map of the corporate territories. The red lines of their spheres of influence pulsed like the veins of a living organism. Sevia stepped into the projection's cone of light, feeling the electrical voltage of the data surfaces on her skin. Sometimes her voice echoed in the silence of the night. You have to face the snakes to tame them. She touched one of the holographic nodes, flashing information about corporate activities. But whoever steps into their pit should know exactly where they're stepping. Nadine Heimber stood up. Her shadow multiplied in the light of the three celestial bodies. The question is not whether, but how we deal with them. Each group has its poison and its vulnerability. The air conditioning emitted a cold stream that caused the holographic projections to flicker. An atmospheric purifier howled in the distance, its muffled hum filtering through the thick windows. Hugin slowly moved out from behind a bank of clouds, his reddish light turning the shadows in the room blood red for a moment. Then let's study their poisons. Sevia's fingers danced through the holograms, calling up new data streams before they paralyze us with it. Sevia stroked the holographic projections of the 6 megacorporations. Her fingers paused at the pulsating symbols of Astromin and Quantum Dynamics. The lights of the corporate headquarters glowed like artificial stars on the 3-dimensional map. Astromine controls our lifelines in space. Paulina pointed to the asteroid mines marked in red. The moonlight flashed her admiral's insignia. Without their infrastructure, 30% of our colonies would collapse within a week. Myra activated a new projection. Columns of numbers materialized in the air. Trade routes shone like bloodstreams between the stars. Olga Petrov has maneuvered the corporation into a position that leaves us no choice. She knows that. As the breeze from the air conditioning made the holograms flicker, Rita Griffin leaned forward, her scar peering even deeper in the blue light of the displays. But don't forget quantum dynamics. Heisenberg is sitting on technology that could change our entire communications. Sevia watched the pulsing display of the quantum dynamics labs. Her fingers fumbled over the encrypted data packets, streamed through the projection like digital rain. The triple moonlight refracted in the holographic parts. The two corporations complement each other. Nadine stepped next to her adoptive mother. Her robe rustled softly. Astromine provides the hardware, quantum dynamics, and computing power. Together they could pull us out of the economic crisis, Sevia interrupted. She enlarged an area of the map and pointed to the two companies' joint projects. We're already cooperating with Astronomy on the orbital shipyards. Expanding this would be the logical next step. The whine of the passing atmospheric purifier filtered muffled through the windows. Paulina leaned against the cool marble of a pillar. But can we trust Heisenberg? His quantum computers could crack any of our system. Maybe we must take the risk. Myra scrolled through the economic data. Her fingers cast dancing shadows on the wall. The other corporations are too preoccupied with themselves. Agiscorp is mired in internal power struggles. Ecosphere has its hands full with the terraforming projects. Lita nodded slowly. And Neogen and Cyberlink are too dependent on government contracts. They wouldn't sabotage a cooperative venture. Munin's reddish glow briefly bathed the room in copper-colored light. Sevia's fingers hovered over the pulsating corporate logos. The projections reflected in her eyes as she studied the intricate connections between the power blocks.
Hey, I would be happy if you could give my video a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to my